All right, at this time, it's my honor to bring up Amy Fox. Amy, just start making your way up, and we'll come up here and do that. Amy is the abstinence coordinator for the center. She's been there for since August of 2013. She received her national abstinence certificate, which, believe me, I'm sure is not an easy task to go through and get all that. So we're very grateful to have her in all that. So please help me in welcoming Amy Fox.
We're excited to be here and talk to you about some new exciting things that are going on with our Why Not program. If you're not familiar with the abstinence education program that Hope is involved in, it began in 2012 with a few concerned parents about what was being taught in a middle school class over at Snow Canyon Middle School. And since 2012, the program has grown to be in 9 different high schools in our entire county, including one high school in Iron County. And it's just been a huge success. Over the last year, we have added 2 new exciting things to the Why Not program. First, the expansion into launching our 7th grade curriculum that is now being taught at Vista Charter School, and our prayer is that it will just grow each semester into eventually being in all of our 7th grade classrooms here in Washington County. The second addition to the Why Not program is a great video that was created last year. The video includes a group of young adults talking about the pressures that they felt in high school. The thing about the Why Not program is it's so full of statistics and it's so full of medical accuracy that we really want to have a moment with the kids at the end of the class where we can really prick at their emotions. And this really does it. These young adults do such a good job to share and make a connection with high school students who really look up to what young adults have to say. So if you guys could just enjoy this 3-minute video. This video was shown at the end of every 10th grade class, so all of our high school students will see it. So just enjoy this video of our young adults explaining why not.
Somewhere in the 50s range, I would say probably 15%.
I honestly think it's probably high. Probably 75% maybe.
Maybe 40%? Good, yeah, it's going in the direction. That's good news.
Absolutely, I think it would.
I think it would take a lot of pressure off of them. I think it's media, personally.
My friends had a big influence on things I did.
Media is a big one.
Definitely, the media adds on to this by kind of exploiting our desire to be loved, our desire to be accepted.
Gosh, if you decide to wait, what you lose is a lot of heartache. You know, I've made my mistakes, and the first thing that I take away from it is broken hearts on both sides.
You'll run into a lot of heartbreak. I mean, statistically speaking, any relationship that you engage in high school is not going to end well. You're probably not going to marry them.
If you get pregnant, you're freedom. It's gone at that point. You're with the child, and that's all your life is.
You have the opportunity to make a decision at any point in your life. So if you've already done it, it's not too late.
I would say, I wish I could have taken it back. And, you know, the mistakes you made in the past don't define who you are in the present. You're not defined by your past.
When something like that in life hits you, you know, we've all made mistakes. You and we're not perfect. So regardless of whether you've done it or not, you decide when to stop.
It's totally fine to make mistakes, and I think to learn from it and just grow from it. And I think there are so many different other ways that a relationship can get better rather than just being physical. So yeah, I'm just hard to just make wise decisions in her next relationship.
Yeah, I did it once, and oh goodness, I mean, yeah, already worthless. I'm already not worth anything. So I wouldn't matter. And I used to think that it was because like I had to do that to show someone that I loved them. And that's not love. It's not love at all.
I applaud that.
I think that's really cool.
You save yourself a lot of heartache.
At this time, it's my pleasure to bring up to the podium to share a little bit about what's going on at Hope Pregnancy Care Center right now. The director of Hope Pregnancy Care Center, and that is Ms. Tammy Campbell.
Thank you, Jake. I can't even believe how many people are out there. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you, our friends, treasured friends. And we had beautiful music, and we had yummy food, and we also got to shop. So thank you to everyone who's made this event a success tonight. We could not have done it with all of you, for sure. But I have a question I would like to ask all of you. And I want you to think about it, and please raise your hand as I ask this question. How many of you were planned pregnancies? All right. I can't really see all of you. That light's shining right in my eyes. But it appears to me that it would probably be half of the room would be empty if the unplanned were not here. And that word unplanned is something that evokes fear in all of us. Not always, but most oftentimes it does. We live in a time where the unplanned is not what we desire. We want to know what we're doing every single day. We want to know what's going on. And how many of you go to bed at night and you say, goodness, my life is so mundane, so boring. Lord, give me a crisis. We don't do that, do we? No, not at all. So, thankfully, we don't usually have to go through a crisis alone or unplanned things alone. And we just take a car accident, for example. We are thankful that there are people out there that can be what we call first responders that can come to our aid. And we are also very thankful that those first responders are trained to be calm and equipped with what they need to do to help us. What would it be like if they were just as scared and traumatized and panicked as the injured? That wouldn't work, would it? So I want to let you know how we are considered first responders at Hope Pregnancy Care Center as well. And first of all, let me tell you about our mission. We at Hope Pregnancy Care Center, we offer compassionate, life-affirming, practical, emotional, and spiritual support to women and men who experience an unplanned pregnancy. As a first responder to our clients, we give calm, trained, compassionate care as they have a chance to sort through their concerns and their worries. We're in a unique position to offer medically accurate information and ultrasound referrals in a manner that allows the client to make a calm and positive decision to an unplanned pregnancy. The ministry of hope, however, goes farther than just being a first responder. A relationship is built. A connection is made with the men and women if they choose to take part in the programs offered at Hope. We're not a one-time transaction model. We strive to be a transformational, life-changing model. We're given the opportunity to share the gift of God's grace and mercy by entering into their lives. We couldn't do the Lord's work at Hope without any of you. And then, I can say without all of you. The Lord has used your kindness and generosity towards the clients of Hope, and He's multiplied it. Your generosity has come to Hope in many ways, through prayer, through volunteering, through donating items to both the Hope Chest and to the center, and then buying those treasures at the Hope Chest, and financial gifts. Thank you so much, because if you've had a chance to look at your booklets on the table, and you looked at the mortgage information inside of there, it is amazing what God has done with your gifts. We are so close to paying that mortgage off right now. It's within reach. And that can only be done through the power of God, through you. So we thank you so much. I think that was because God is the author of all of that. We're so thankful for that. I have asked Tina Otto to come up and share a little bit about a God-sized dream, that by having our mortgage paid off, it allows Hope to be open up to some of those God-sized dreams for Hope. And so Tina's going to share a little bit about one of the programs called PACE at Hope. Just take a couple minutes, and it's definitely a God-sized dream.
Good evening. Have any of you heard that song, This Is My Story, by the group Big Daddy Weave? It's a pretty cool song, and one of the stanzas is, if I should speak, then let it be, of the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in. Oh, to tell you my story is to tell of Him. Well, here's my story. It's a story of an 18-year-old girl who thought she had it all under control, who thought the boy in her life was the one, and who found herself pregnant long before she was ready. My story is of a scared, lonely girl who 26 years ago chose to abort that precious baby boy because of her fear. And my story is of a woman who just 6 years ago found herself before the feet of Jesus, asking for forgiveness and having it granted with all His kindness, grace, and mercy. I had carried continual pain, guilt, shame for 20 years of my life. During those 20 years, I found myself living a destructive life, filled with alcohol, promiscuity, divorce, depression, anxiety, and the list unfortunately goes on from there. I didn't realize that all of that was a symptom of post-abortion syndrome, and that millions of men and women face it daily. Through God's saving grace, He had a plan for me, as Jeremiah 29:11 tells us. He placed me in a pregnancy care center on the island of Maui during the years that my husband, son, and I lived there. And my heart was to volunteer, but first I needed to complete a PACE program. What I didn't know prior to that program was the amount of anger that I had towards not only myself, but others, and that I had yet to forgive myself. God used that Bible study to release me of that anger, and I learned to forgive myself. Another stanza of that song is, if I told you my story, you would hear victory over the enemy. And if I told you my story, you would hear freedom that was won for me. And if I told you my story, you would hear life overcome the grave. Grace be to God that I have found victory over the enemy. And I hope the same for you. At Hope Pregnancy Care Center, I have the distinct pleasure of overseeing the PACE program. And I would love to hear from you. If you or anyone you know has experienced abortion, whether it be men or women, please call me. I pray that your God-sized dream is to find victory over the enemy. It's time to live free.
Thank you so much, Tina. That brings us to our theme for tonight. Hope in a future. Jeremiah was called by God to do something different, unplanned, as a young man of 20. It wasn't unplanned to God at all, according to Jeremiah 1:5. God knew Jeremiah before he formed him in the womb and set him apart to be a prophet to the nations. Jeremiah hesitated to accept God's call because the task was demanding, difficult, and he was doubtful he could make a difference. He served as the prophet to God's chosen people at a time when idolatry flourished, children were offered as sacrifices to idols. God was disregarded, God was disobeyed, and it looked as though there was no hope for his nation. Does that sound familiar? Anyone right now, where we live? History tends to repeat itself, especially when we don't listen and we don't learn from the past. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet because he had a heart of compassion for his people and their hardened hearts toward God. Jeremiah's messages to the people were courageous and compassionate. They were convicting. Even though the people didn't listen and they were eventually exiled to Babylon, he wrote letters to encourage them. Jeremiah 29:11 is a portion of a letter that reads, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans not to harm you, plans to prosper, but to prosper you, to give you a hope and a future." That is just like the Lord, to continue to offer us his hope, even when we feel we don't deserve it. God wanted the people to know that he hadn't given up on them, even in their rebellion and exile. God gave his people a gracious promise to deliver them, and he kept his promise by eventually letting them go home, and by ultimately giving them and us Jesus. God makes his plans for his people that brings true hope in the future. May I encourage you all here to be like Jeremiah. Steadfast, true, compassionate, and courageous. Share the message of hope with courage. Share the message of life with compassion and love. And to be steadfast and true, even when you are doubtful, it will make a difference. God brings clients to the doors of hope for a specific purpose. He wants them to know how dearly loved they are by him. He wants them to know of his hope and his future, which is freely offered to them in their great time of need. That same desire is for the children of our clients. We have a special gift for you to take home with you tonight. Every year, beautiful bookmarks are made by a sweet friend of hope to commemorate the banquet. But this year, they have a dual purpose. If you will pick them up in the middle of your tables, you will see that on the back of them are some names handwritten. Because it's calligraphy, you may need to hold it away instead of holding it close. It's hard to read sometimes when they're close, but if you hold it afar, you will see that there are nearly 300 names of babies that were born to clients out in this room. And they are written on the back of your bookmarks. We've been given permission by our clients to share the names of their children with you. You have no idea who the child's parents are, but God does. You have no idea if the child is a boy or a girl, depending on the name, but God does. You do not have any idea where that child lives, but God does. And you don't know the parents of that child, but God does. God knows their name. He knows each one by name. He knows the plans he has for them. Please take a bookmark with you home tonight and pray for your child. And pray for your child's parents throughout the year, because they haven't been forgotten by God. He wants to be their hope, their future, and bring victory out of the unplanned. I'm going to finish with a poem that I borrowed from another friend of Hope. We have a lot of friends of Hope. Some of you may know this poem, as she may have shared it with you in your times of struggling with the unplanned and letting God be in control. The rose. It's only a tiny rosebud, a flower of God's design, but I cannot unfold the petals with these clumsy hands of mine. The secret of unfolding flowers is not known to such as I. The flower God opens so sweetly, in my hands would fade and die. If I cannot unfold a rosebud, this flower of God's design, then how can I think I have wisdom to unfold this life of mine? So I'll trust in Him for His leading each moment of every day, and I'll look to Him for His guidance each step of the pilgrim way. For the pathway that lies before me, my Heavenly Father knows. I'll trust Him to unfold the moments, just as He unfolds the rose. Thank you. It is time now for me to introduce our speaker for the evening. I would love to welcome Melissa Ohden up to the stage here, and I'd like to share just a little bit about her with you. You probably read a lot already, but I'll just read a little bit more. Melissa is the survivor of a failed saline infusion abortion. Believing she was less than 5 months pregnant with Melissa in 1977, her birth mother attempted to abort her. Miraculously, the abortion did not succeed in ending Melissa's life. Although the doctors initially believed that she would not live past her infancy, and if she did, she would suffer from multiple disabilities throughout her lifetime, she was adopted into a loving home as an infant, and she's not only survived, but she's thrived. Fulfilling the purpose that she believes God has set out for her when He saved her from the certain death of the abortion attempt, Melissa is truly a voice for the voiceless. Please welcome Melissa.
Well, before I start this evening, I need to do a couple of acknowledgments. First of all, can we thank Jay for his amazing job tonight, keeping us going as the MC. I want to thank you for your bravery. I think all of us have a lot to learn from you tonight. And I hope all of you take very seriously the words that she shared tonight. You know, I know when most people hear that I'm coming to speak at an event like this, some people are worried. They're afraid of what I might have to say. They're afraid of what it's like to come face to face with a child who is now a grown woman, but that child was supposed to have their life ended through an abortion. I know that there are probably people in the room tonight who are coming face to face with their own past. And I hope that you take Tina's words very seriously tonight, to know that that PACE program exists for you too, that every woman and man deserves to know that there is hope and healing and love and forgiveness to be found after abortion. And I hope that even if it's difficult for you to hear parts of my story tonight, that what you take away from this is that God reigns supreme. Amen. And that His plan for restoration and reconciliation will continue to unfold in each and every one of our lives. Because what I've experienced, the pain and the suffering, pales in comparison to the joy and the love and the hope that I have found in my life. And I want to, first of all, also encourage you on this journey with hope. You know, I now travel around the world sharing my miraculous story of what God has done in my life. And I always like to ask people, you know, how are you involved in this ministry? And there have been times when I've asked that question And I've actually had people who hang their head down and say, I don't really do anything except pray. Don't you ever hang your head down low and say you just pray. Prayer is powerful. Prayer saves people's lives, and I'm living testament of that. Some of you may guess from reading about me before I got here tonight, or maybe you can tell by my little bit of an accent, I'm not from around here. Anybody want to guess? Many of you have read about me. You can't vote if you spoke with me earlier. I'm from the Midwest, actually. I was born and raised in Iowa. Anybody ever been? Woo! Iowa never gets a shout out. Thank you, ma'am. A lot of people, when I travel, they say, Iowa? Where is that? They grow potatoes there, right? If you know that joke, I know you know where Iowa was. But I was born and raised in Iowa, and I now live in Kansas City with my family. But my story started in Iowa 38 years ago. And I know that prayer saved my life. And I want to share a little bit about that with you for just a moment. I was sharing my story at an event much smaller than this one, about 5 or 6 years ago back in Iowa, outside of the community where my birth mother's abortion had taken place. But that night, as I was waiting for the opportunity to speak, I saw two men on opposite sides of the room overcome with emotion, to the point that they were actually both holding their head in their hand and just sobbing. And I wanted the chance to speak with them that night, individually, to find out what it was in my story that had touched them so deeply. The younger man of the two got up and left from his side of the room before I could approach him. But the older man of the two stuck around. And so I was waiting for that chance to approach him that night. But before I could, he actually climbed up on the stage to give the closing prayer. That's when I realized he was no ordinary man. The collar from his shirt and his jacket was peeking out. And I realized that he was a priest from that area. He spoke words that night that changed my life forever. And maybe, just maybe, they'll have an influence on yours. He pointed out to our crowd of just a couple hundred people, and he said, "Who says that prayers go unanswered?" And I was sitting almost directly across from him and thinking, gosh, it really feels like he's speaking to me. It's because he was. He went on that night, and he shared how he had actually prayed outside of St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, back in 1977, that someday a child's life would be spared from an abortion. And he went on and pointed right at me and said, "Here she is." I survived my biological mother's abortion at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, in August of 1977. Prayers save and transform people's lives. And lest we think that it's solely clergy that are responsible for those prayers. You know, I went on a few years later and spoke at a pregnancy center fundraiser, much like this one, for a new center we were building. And again, I was speaking outside of the community where the abortion had taken place. But as I told the story of meeting that priest, one by one, people stood up from their table. Ordinary people, just like you and me, stood up from their tables, raised their hand, and said, "Melissa, I used to pray outside of that same hospital back in 1977. That night, over 20 people raised their hands, knowing that they made a huge difference in my life. So if you haven't been praying yet for the women and the men and the children who come through the doors of this ministry, if you haven't been praying for the staff and the volunteers and the board, I hope that you begin to do so tonight. You may never see the fruits of your labor here on earth like the priest did that night, but I trust that you will see the fruits of your labor someday in heaven. And I have no doubt that you will be absolutely joyful indeed with what you find. And now you know a little bit about how I came into this world. Everybody is okay with the fact that I'm 38, almost 39 years old? It's okay. You know, sometimes people get stuck on that fact in my life. I'm 38 years old, and I will never hesitate to tell the world how old I am, because the Lord spared my life in 1977. And what I know about my biological mother is that she fits most statistics when it comes to abortion. You know, my birth mother looked an awful lot like the women who come through the doors of Hope still today. My biological mother was 19 years old. She was a college student. She wasn't married to my biological father, even though they had dated all throughout high school into college. You know, sadly, the greatest statistic my birth mother fits is one that a lot of people aren't even aware of, and I want to share it with you. And that's the one that involves coercion. You know, we live in a world that talks about abortion being a choice and a right. But what we don't often hear about are the stories where there is no choice, where there is no right for that woman. And international statistics tell us over 64% of women identify being coerced into their abortion. So it isn't their choice. Someone else makes that choice for them or puts them in that position that abortion is the only option made available to them. I spent years of my life believing that my birth mother was coerced into her abortion with me. And sadly, what I learned in recent years is that it was actually taken one step further for her. She wasn't just coerced. She was literally forced against her will at the age of 19 to undergo that saline infusion abortion. And I know when most of you hear that she was coerced and forced, the wheels in your head start turning, right? You wonder who it could have been that would have made such a thing happen. The first guess is usually that it was my biological father, because we know that men play an incredibly important role when it comes to whether lives are protected and respected or ultimately rejected. But it wasn't my biological father. It was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was a prominent nurse there in that Sioux City community, who certainly knew a lot about the scientific basis for when life begins, but who also knew an awful lot about how to make a secret forced abortion take place on her own daughter. That saline infusion abortion was the most common procedure back in the 1970s. I know it's not a pretty thing to hear about tonight, but I need to share just a little bit about it with you, because even though it's hard to hear, it ultimately points back to the glory of God. That saline infusion abortion forced upon my biological mother involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. The intent of that toxic salt solution was to scald me to death from the outside in. If you look it up on the internet to read more about it, you'll read how that procedure usually lasted about 72 hours. The child soaked in that toxic salt solution until their life was slowly snuffed out. And then premature labor was induced with the intent of that deceased child being delivered. In my own case, my medical records indicate that I didn't soak in that toxic salt solution for just 3 days. My medical records indicate that I soaked in it for 5. Even 2 days longer than I was meant to by those standards of the abortion procedure. And there was no mistake made. Trust me. The abortionist and my grandmother thought that they would get away with what was done, that no one would ever find out what they did to my biological mother, and certainly no one would ever find out about me. And over those 5 days, they tried multiple times to induce my birth mother's labor with me. Finally, on that 5th day of the abortion procedure, my birth mother's labor was successfully induced. And that day I was delivered right there at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, meant to be a successful abortion. As hard as it is to hear all of those things, I think we can all celebrate the fact that God clearly had other plans that day, right? I think he deserves a round of applause. It's a miraculous thing indeed. And even though it's taken me many years of my life to piece together all of the events that happened that day and thereafter, many of them that you're going to hear about tonight, one of the first things I was told over the years is that when I was delivered there by the abortionist that day, he looked upon my live birth and demanded that I be left to die. It's another difficult thing to hear about. What's most difficult for me is to realize that I'm not the first child in our world that has happened to. And even more difficult for me is the reality that I'm not the last child that that's happened to. And truly for me, the greatest difficulty is in knowing the real truth about what happened that day. I now know that it wasn't the abortionist who delivered me in the final step of that abortion procedure. It wasn't the abortionist who looked upon my live birth and demanded that I be left to die. Maybe you've already figured out who it is, right? It was my grandmother, the nurse once again. Not only did she force the abortion upon my biological mother, but then she delivered me in that final step of the procedure, came face to face with her firstborn grandchild, yet still demanded that I be left to die. And I share that with you not to lay any blame on her whatsoever. It's one of those things I felt like I could never tell the world. But God has made it clear that He has a message. I need to share that with the world, to share how important it is to love those who have harmed us. I love her. I love my grandmother. I love that abortionist, no matter what decisions they were making about my life. We live in a world that expects me to hate her. But I love her in that unconditional way Jesus loves each and every one of us. That radical way we can't wrap our head or our heart around. And I encourage you to love others in your life the same way. It will change not only their life, but it will change yours too. And it changed my life that day to have 2 nurses on staff at that hospital find out about the secret abortion, the little girl who was being left to die, and those nurses fought for me. I may never meet them face to face, but I have heard a lot about them. And I think of those nurses a lot like the staff of hope. They are the first responders. They are the people who are fighting in the trenches for life. And because those nurses fought for me, I am here tonight. You would never guess, right? In a million years by looking at me, that I should have been scalded to death in the womb. You would never know by looking at me tonight that when I first survived, the prognosis for my life was very poor, as you heard a little bit about already. When I was delivered, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I was a whopping 2 pounds, 14 ounces, which reflected to the medical professionals that my birth mother was much further along in her pregnancy than what the abortionist had either guessed or maybe wanted to admit to. And one of the first notations in my medical records is that I looked like I was about 31 weeks gestational age when I survived. What a blessing it was for me to survive. But I fought for my life. I suffered from severe respiratory and liver problems for an extended period of time. I suffered from seizures. You'll often see pictures of me on the internet or on various television shows, and you'll see my head was shaved from temple to temple to deal with all the IV lines that I had going through my body. And as you heard in my introduction tonight, the doctors did not believe that I would continue to live for very long. And if I did, I was going to suffer from multiple disabilities, ranging from blindness and deafness to having emotional and mental disabilities. Which of course begs the same question that everybody else around the world has in their head when you've heard everything about me already tonight, right? Is there something wrong with her that we can't see? Admit it, you're thinking it. Everybody does. And you can probably guess by the way I joke about it. No matter what the doctor said about what my life was going to look like, I'm standing here tonight perfectly healthy and whole, thanks be to God once again. The doctors have pored over my medical file and made it clear there is no medical reason why anybody like me exists in the world. And I am so okay with that. I truly put my trust in Him. No offense to any of the doctors in the room tonight, but I know who the greatest physician truly is. Amen. 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 Amen to my mom and dad. You'll catch my parents sometime on other interviews talking about how the first time they met me, I was still lying in an incubator full of tubes and wires, fighting for my life. When my mom and dad, my adoptive parents, first got to meet me. You'll often hear my parents talk about how the first time they laid eyes on me, they fell in love with me. I was this tiny, wrinkly, red girl, full of tubes and wires, fighting for her life. And my parents looked past all of that and they simply saw God's inherent beauty in me. And I want every child in our world to have the opportunity to be loved the way that I have been loved. I want every parent to have the opportunity to fall in love with their child, whether it's a biological parent, whether it's an adoptive parent. I want every parent to have that opportunity to fall in love with their child the way my parents fell in love with me. And that's what Hope is in the business of doing. They give parents the opportunity to fall in love with their children, and for children like me to be loved. What an incredible ministry this is. And love changes things, doesn't it? I hope you've experienced that own love in your life. You know, my parents loved me so mightily, even lying in an incubator. They loved me so mightily that I was healed and able to go home to them just a few short months after I survived that abortion. I know their love transformed my life. And I lived in a home where I felt great love. I knew that I was adopted from a young age. I knew that it meant that I was not only loved by them and loved by God, but I was loved by my biological parents. Our parents did an amazing job of helping my older sister, who's also adopted, helping us know that our birth parents loved us enough to give us life and the gift of our amazing family. Adoption was so normal in our family that when our little brother came along years later biologically, 15 years of infertility before he came along, we thought he was the odd man out at our house. And I can share that with you because he's pretty honest about it in interviews he does about our life. You know, I think I can share safely a joke that we said to him growing up. We used to say to him, you know, they had you. You can see where this is going, right? They chose us. And I know that's not a safe joke in certain circles because it might sound like some children are unwanted. But I share that with you because that's truly how loved and how special we felt in our family. We thought he was at a disadvantage because he was not adopted. And that's what I knew growing up. What I clearly didn't know was the story behind my adoption. I was actually 14 years old when I found out the story of my survival. And I know 14 is a tough age. If we have any 14-year-olds or close to that in the room tonight, I know that it's not easy. And my parents never wanted me to find out at the age of 14. They never wanted me to find out ever the story about my survival because they loved me enough. They were afraid of how it was going to change my life and change my perspective about my biological family. So they kept it a secret. But when I was 14, a very unplanned, unexpected kind of thing happened at our house. My older sister faced an unplanned pregnancy as a high school student. And even though we were clearly raised in a home with a set of beliefs about life and the gift of adoption, like so many women in that position, my sister was scared. She was fearful. You know, all those things that Tammy has talked about tonight when we face the unplanned. But no matter how scared she was, no matter how much she was considering an abortion, I am forever thankful that she was strong enough to turn to our parents and know that no matter what, they were going to love her and they would support her and they would speak the truth and love to her about the choices that she was considering. I never knew that that pregnancy would change my life. When they were told that she was pregnant with her son, they felt called by God to tell her the story of my survival, hoping that she would understand the true depths of that decision she was considering. I will tell you it made all the difference in the world. My oldest nephew is now about 24 years old. And we can live in a world that talks about him being unplanned, but I certainly know he was planned by God, Amen. As each and every one of us are. And he was planned for such a time as that, because it was necessary for me to find out the story of my survival. After my sister found out the story behind my life, like any good teenage girl, she didn't keep it a secret from me. Some of you have sisters or teenagers, I can gather. You know, my sister didn't tell me everything about my survival, but what she did do was encourage me to ask our parents for more to the story of my life. And lots of people ask me in hindsight, You know, Melissa, didn't you ever see this coming? Didn't you ever feel different? No. If I could shout that from the rooftops, I think I would emphatically yell, no, I never felt this different. I didn't know back then that abortions could fail, that children could live. I never would have considered for a second that if that was going to be anyone, that it would have been me. And so no, I didn't see it coming. Late one night when I sat our mother down and asked for the story of my life, for us to sit for hours, and in the midst of that discussion, for the words to finally fall out of her mouth, she had to say, Melissa, your biological mother had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it. I'm sure you can all begin to imagine a little bit about what that night was like in the life of a 14-year-old girl who had only known love and purpose in her family before that. That night, my life came crashing to a halt. If it's possible to feel every human emotion at once, I felt it that night. You know, I was angry and I was scared, I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. I felt guilty for surviving when tens of millions of children have not been as lucky as me. And as angry as I was that night, I can honestly tell you I didn't stay angry for very long, because the Holy Spirit moved in such a powerful way to remind me that I have nothing to be angry about. And it's so true, right? Amen. I am just one of a handful of survivors out of 58 million lives lost in our country alone. I have nothing to be angry about. I was given the gift of health and a strong voice to serve God. I was given this amazing purpose and the gift of my family. I have nothing to be angry about. What I started to feel, though, all those years ago was incredible sadness. And not just a sadness for children like me that will lose their lives to abortion, but I felt immense grief for my biological parents and the men and women that are facing an abortion decision every single day. I didn't know back then that my birth mother wasn't given any other choice. But what I did know is that her life had to have been forever changed after that day. And the Lord made it clear to me that I was supposed to find my biological parents, that I needed to let them know that they are loved and they are forgiven by Him and by me. And I started looking for them when I was 19 years old. I didn't find them until I was almost 30. Anybody ever walked through a desert in their life? You go through that period of time where you are questioning God's plans, where you are trying to interpret His will, where His timing doesn't quite match up with your expectations. Please tell me I'm not the only impatient one in the room. Show of hands, anybody? Make me feel better? Okay, thank you, folks. You know, I will readily admit that I am always a work in progress. And during those 10 years, I did everything humanly possible to find my biological parents. You know, I have a book that will be coming out next January called You Carried Me. A couple of euphemisms there if you catch that. But in that book, I will be chronicling some of the searching that I did. I spend a lot of my time now helping other survivors and adoptees find their birth records and find their biological families because, truth be told, 10 years of searching, I learned a lot. But during those 10 years, I also learned a lot about how abortion affects all of us. You know, during those 10 years, God really made it clear to me that I was called to not only be a voice for those who are voiceless, but to share with the world that there is love and forgiveness. There is hope and a future to be found for each and every one of us. And I found my hope and my future in those 10 years of searching. I married my husband. Lots of people have questions about him. He's a pretty normal guy, except for his wife. I can joke about that because we live a fairly odd life in the public eye. And as you can probably guess, someone like me doesn't always receive a lot of support in the public. But my husband is that steadfast support. During those 10 years, I actually moved to Sioux City, Iowa, that same city where my birth mother's abortion took place. I moved there to finish my master's degree in social work. I ended up working for the very same adoption agency that handled my adoption, because God's plans always come full circle. But during those 10 years, I knew that I was being called to share this story with the world. And before I did that, I wanted to find my birth parents, and I wanted to obtain my medical records. Because we know, right, that people look upon a life like mine and want to say, oh, this can't be real. She looks too normal for what happened to her. I get that one a lot, and I don't take offense to it. Because if people admit that I look too normal, then people are admitting they know what should have been done to me. But during those 10 years, I continued to search for my biological parents. But I learned to trust in God's will, and God's plans unfolded in His perfect timing in 2007. I finally obtained my medical records after being told over the years, no, 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 nothing here exists about you. I finally obtained those medical records, and you can see them on my website. It's just Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com. I've had the great opportunity in the past year to share copies of my medical records as I testified before the U.S. House and the Senate. And I truly believe that that is a game changer for people to come face to face with records that say things like, a saline infusion for an abortion was done, but was unsuccessful. It's an interesting statement, right? I'm only here tonight because an abortion didn't succeed in ending my life. And as hard as it was to read through some of those medical records, I ultimately experienced great joy, because they committed a really big mistake when they sent me those medical records. They forgot to black out my birth parents' names in a portion of it. After 10 years of searching and working for the same adoption agency that probably had a file about me, lo and behold, God allowed the greatest HIPAA violation I've known yet to occur, right? No one but Jesus can do these things. And I am so thankful. And isn't it great, right, that He redeems and restores all things in our lives, but we also get to laugh and smile about the way that He goes about doing it sometimes? And I experienced such joy that night, getting to read not only about my life, but find out who my birth parents were. That night I started searching very quickly for them, and you're never going to guess what I learned. I learned that I was living in the very same city as my biological father. He was there in Sioux City. I moved there not thinking for a second that I had biological family there. The Lord has hope and a future for each and every one of us. And I prayed about it for many months after finding out my birth father was there. You know, after 10 years of searching for him, I suddenly was left kind of speechless and motionless. I didn't want to mess anything up, and so of course I trusted in the Lord, and He made it clear that I needed to reach out to my birth father. I sent him a letter in 2007 to his office and not his house. I didn't know if he had ever told his family about me, so I was hoping to protect him a little bit that way. And I told him all the things I've told you all tonight. You know, that I'm so blessed that he is loved and forgiven, that I'm not angry or bitter. And I let him know in that letter, here we are in the very same city. If you ever want to communicate with me, I'll be waiting to hear from you. It's been almost 9 years, and I'm still waiting. And that is okay. Think about all the years the Lord gave me to prepare for that possibility. And in reality, it's much more complicated, as you're going to hear about in just a second. Because sadly, abortion complicates people's lives. You know, that's also one of the important things I think about hope, is that they aren't complicating people's lives. If you sat down with the women who come through the door, I bet you would hear how they allowed them the chance to just breathe, to think, to understand what all of their choices and options are. They loved them. That's an incredible gift. But abortion complicated my birth father's life, in addition to the rest of my biological family, as I'll get to here in just a moment. You know, about that same time, I turned my sights on my birth mother and her family. I couldn't find my birth mother through my searching, because she went on to marry someone else not long after the abortion occurred. But I found her parents. You know that grandmother that I told you all about? Have you ever done something and then you look back on it and you can't believe that you did it? That's like every single day of my life. I look back and say, wow, Lord, you did it again. And back then, I didn't know, of course, the role my grandmother played, and I sent my grandparents a letter asking for them to share my message to my birth mother. I would like to think that if I had known then what I know now, that I still would have sent them that letter. Because I think my grandparents needed to hear from me just as much as my birth mother did. Since I hadn't heard from my birth father, I never expected to hear back from them. But within just a few short days, I did. It was my 30th birthday, and I received my grandfather's response. In his letter, he admitted that my live birth was not the intention that day at the hospital. I think that was very courageous for him, given the circumstances. But he went on and he told me some things about my birth mother and her family. And I want to share two of them with you. Two of the pieces that he shared, because they aren't just the story of my birth mother and her family. They're the story of so many of our lives. The first point my grandfather shared is that my birth mother had never told anyone about her abortion. Think back to what Tina has shared already tonight. Every woman, every man deserves to know that there is hope and healing and love and forgiveness to be found after an abortion. But my grandfather also closed his letter with his second point. Something I didn't understand at first, but I understand it now, and maybe you will too. He closed that letter by saying my message of forgiveness and love would not be passed along to my birth mother because they were estranged. No relationship. And it makes sense, doesn't it? When we look upon the landscape of 38 years, we know why their relationship has been forever changed. And even though what has happened in my family is quite dramatic, I know that we are not alone in this. Abortion doesn't just end a life, it changes lives forever. And it also changes relationships. It changes the landscape of families. And that's my encouragement to all of you. By your continued investment in this center, not only will you be saving a life like mine and transforming the lives of women like my birth parents, but you will be changing families for generations to come in your community by allowing them that opportunity at life and other choices. What an incredible gift you are giving back. But that was the last time I heard from my grandparents, was 2007. That's also the first time I came forward publicly as a survivor. Robert, if you could cue up that picture for me, you're going to see a picture instead of me on the screen for a moment. You know, the first time I ever shared my story publicly was out on Capitol Hill out in Washington, D.C., because that's a really friendly place for somebody like me, right? And I don't know why I didn't realize it was just going to get a little bit bigger from there. All I kept thinking to myself at the time was, thank you, Lord, for this opportunity, but I'm never going to do this again. Anybody ever kind of drawn a line in the sand with him and said, I will do this, but I won't do that? And then you keep finding yourself doing this, and doing this, and doing this. You know, I told my husband, I got home from that speaking engagement and told my husband about my bad case of nerves and how I wasn't a public speaker and how I was never going to do that again. And what we learned very quickly is that I didn't have a bad case of nerves, I had a really bad case of morning sickness. That's our oldest daughter, Olivia, who is going to be 8 at the end of this month. That picture is many years old, but it's a favorite, as you're going to hear about in a second. There's a good reason for that. But the first time I spoke publicly, I was a few days pregnant with her. There are no coincidences in this life. And I know that that was a clear sign from God that I was doing exactly what my life was intended for. And throughout my pregnancy with her, I got blessed to be able to start traveling around the world and advocate in defense of life. You know, I ultimately gave up my career as a social worker to accept my calling. And I will tell you, if any of you are being led by the Lord in a place that you feel unprepared for, remember that God doesn't call those who are equipped. He equips the called.
That's right.
And when you answer that calling, you will suddenly find you have all the gifts and talents and skills you need to fulfill His calling for you in the world. But I was blessed to start loosening my grip on my career and travel around the world. What I didn't know, though, is that as I was starting to advocate for life, my birth father was back home in Iowa fighting for his. That's the complication. That's why he never responded to my letter, because he passed away about 6 months after I sent it to him. I didn't know for a while that he passed away. I learned by very innocently Googling his name on the internet one night. My husband's an IT guy and had warned me to stop doing things like that. It's the one time in my life that I didn't listen to him. That's why my husband's not here tonight, because he can answer that question. You know, I can joke about that also, but as you can probably guess, that was a really difficult time in my life. Because I spent 10 years searching for my birth father, found him right there in my own backyard, had so many hopes and plans for a possible relationship, and then I lost him. And maybe some of you can relate to what that's like. I always say it's easy to believe in God's will when things go the way we've planned. And it's a whole other thing to believe in God's will when things go otherwise. And I questioned his plans that night. And he spoke very clearly to me that night in return. He reminded me to be patient, because his plan was much greater. And it's always true, isn't it? As the months unfolded after that, I got to see his plan. His plan actually involved our daughter Olivia being born at St. Luke's Hospital. You can't make this stuff up, can you? I love it. Sometimes people go, have you heard her story? She's got to be making this up. Nope. Couldn't have thought of any of it. Probably wouldn't have signed up for most of it, I'll be honest. I've come to accept and respect it. But God restores all things, and he restored and redeemed that hospital. The place where my life was supposed to end now holds the most beautiful memories of my life. If anybody wants to hear later why she was actually born there, I'd be more than happy to share it with you one-on-one, because like all of God's stories, it's amazing. But God's plan also involved that man that you see on the screen. That's my grandfather, my biological father's father. After my birth father passed away, they went to clean out his office, and they found my letter, tucked in his top desk drawer. They never knew about the pregnancy. They never knew about the abortion or the child who lived. And now I have every reason to believe that my birth father also didn't know about the abortion and the child who lived. But my grandfather came into my life back in 2008, and I know you can see the joy and the love in his face, can't you? I am so grateful to have my grandfather and my great aunt from my birth father's family involved in my life. You know, I wish I could stand here tonight and say my entire birth father's family, including my grandmother, who's still married to my grandfather, you know, I wish I could say that they've all been able to bring themselves into our lives, but it's not that simple. Abortion has changed our family forever. And so many people are still struggling with anger and guilt and resentment. And as hard as it is to see them walk through that, I have great faith that God is not done with them yet. And I truly trust that if he intends for me to meet them, it's going to happen, and in his way and in his time.
Amen.
I also take incredible joy in seeing now what's happening in my biological mother's life too. You can switch back from that picture if you want to, Robert. Even though I haven't heard from my grandparents for many, many years, it was just about 3 years ago that another member of her family reached out to me. A cousin of my birth mother is the one who told me about the role my grandmother played in everything taking place. My cousin put me in contact with my two half-sisters, who I haven't met yet, but I correspond with quite frequently. And my cousin even opened the line of communication with none other than my birth mother. And no, we have not met yet, but we are walking on that journey. We have been emailing and sending pictures and cards and letters now for about 3 years. And I know when most people hear 3 years, they start to say, oh, why haven't you met yet? Well, there's one very good reason why we haven't met yet. There was one final secret about my life that even my adoptive parents didn't know about. And that is that my birth mother spent over 30 years of her life believing that I had died that day at the hospital. I'll let that sink in for just a second. if there's one thing about my life I could change, that is the one thing I would change. Because everything you will ever read about how abortion changes someone physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I can tell you that my biological mother walked through those things. And when we first started communicating, she questioned how I could ever love her. She questioned how she would ever be forgiven. Think about how many men and women in our world don't have the opportunity to know what my birth mother knows. She now knows that her child miraculously lived, her child loves her and has forgiven her and is out here in the world fighting for others to have a different experience. We are here tonight, not only so children like me can be saved, but so women and men like my biological parents and my entire biological family, just like you saw my grandfather on the screen, so entire families can have an incredibly different experience. And so I want to thank you for your steadfast support of this ministry over the years. I want to encourage you to continue to pray, and I want to encourage you to answer the Lord's call for you. If He's calling you to get involved in this ministry, and over the years you've been dragging your feet and saying, oh, no, you have the wrong person. I couldn't do that. Always remember, He's never had it wrong yet. And I want to invite Dan up here now to talk to you more a little bit about your own calling and how you can be involved in answering it with the ministry. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Still does miracles. Melissa the Miracle. A new name. Yeah, you can take it. No royalty needed. I want you to take your bookmark. Hold it up, please. Mine says Alan. What does yours say? Avery, give me another one. Mariah, give me one back here. 300? 300 names on these cards. Let me tell you, folks, Hope Pregnancy Care Center is making a difference. And you're part of it. The work's continuing. 2 days ago, I received an email that some of you received. It was at 4:17 p.m. It's similar to ones we've received before. And it simply says this: please pray for 2 abortion-minded clients, fathers, and families. Thank you. We do need to pray, people. This is a war, isn't it? And you may not be on the front lines. You may not be a client advocate. You may not work in the office as part of the staff. You may not be in the board. You may not work at Hope Chest, as many of you do. But I want you to know there must be, in this war, a line of supplies. And you and I have been called to be that line of supplies. That's why you're here. This is a fundraiser. And it would be unbiblical for me to browbeat you. I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit know that He has called you to be part of this incredible, incredible ministry. And then you react and be obedient to Him. You're here either for that reason or because 6 out of 8 of you got a free meal. Let's give it up for our table sponsors, huh? So let's get on with what we need to do. Table sponsors, if you have not already, please pass out the pledge cards with the envelopes. Very easily explained on there. You can either do a one-time gift. There's monetary amounts there. You can write your own in. You might want to make a monthly pledge. Again, there are amounts on there. You can write the amount that you want to give. And then on the back of it, there are 4 ways to give. You can do it by a check. Make that payable to the Hope Pregnancy Care Center. Just Hope HPCC would be fine. We are old-fashioned. We will take cash. Your credit card is another way you may pay. Just be aware that there is a 3% transaction fee that is added to it, and you can make a monthly pledge. And so the instructions of how to do that are there. I want to tell you one other opportunity. Tammy mentioned the Hope Pregnancy Care Center facility. 3 years ago, God moved that shining light that was on the corner of Bluff Street and 100 South over to 400 East and 500 South, right across from the old hospital. And that building was $320,000, but God bought it for $280,000. He just has a way of doing those things. There was a $190,000 mortgage that was taken on that, and as of April 1st this year, that balance is $8,000. And that does not include the $50+ $5,000 of improvements which you guys and the profits from the Hope Chest have paid for. Is God good or what? Does God supply the needs that He chooses to bless? Amen. So, I want to take just a minute, and I'm going to be quiet. And hopefully you all have your envelopes in front of you, your cards in front of you. And if you're couples, I want you to just stop and pray for a moment. And ask God what He wants you to do. You know, I've got to confess, before I got involved, oh, by the way, I'm up here because I'm the rookie on the board. You know, it's sort of like, remember that commercial that had Mikey in it? It's, let's let Mikey eat it. Hey, Mikey, well, this was, hey, Dan, you get up there and tell them to empty their wallets and purses and of all monetary things and put it in the envelope. But I want you to pray about it, because I don't know what God wants you to do. It may not be monetary, but you know, my guess is He wants you to do above and beyond maybe what you're thinking. So I'm going to be quiet. Let's just take a moment, pray together, decide what you want to do, and we know that God will bless us.